Somewhere around 74,000 years ago, the sky went dark. Not for a day. For years. The sun dimmed. Temperatures dropped across the entire planet. Plants died on a massive scale. And the population of every human being alive on Earth collapsed to a number so small that by some estimates, the entire species could have fit inside a few hundred households. This is the closest humanity has ever come to not existing at all. Let's start with how we even know this happened, because nobody wrote it down. There was no written language yet. No survivors left behind a journal. Nobody carved, "Things are going pretty badly" into a rock, which honestly would have been useful. The evidence comes from somewhere much stranger, your own genes. In the 1990s, geneticists studying human DNA noticed something that didn't make sense. Compared to other species our size, age, and global spread, humans have remarkably low genetic diversity. Chimpanzees, who live on a fraction of the landmass humans occupy, have more genetic variation among themselves than the entire human species combined. Somewhere a chimpanzee is reading this and feeling pretty good about itself. For a species that has spread across every continent on Earth, that's backwards. It suggested that at some point, the human population had been crushed down to a tiny number, small enough that everyone alive today descends from a narrow surviving group, not a broad and stable one. This is called a genetic bottleneck, and once geneticists found it, they needed to find what caused it. The leading answer is sitting in Indonesia, and it's not subtle. Lake Toba, on the island of Sumatra, is roughly 100 kilometers long. It looks like a lake. It is actually a crater. Around 74,000 years ago, the supervolcano that used to occupy that space erupted in one of the largest volcanic events in the last 25 million years. To understand the scale, picture this. The eruption ejected somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. For comparison, Mount St. Helens in 1980, an eruption that reshaped an entire region and was visible from space, released roughly 1 cubic kilometer. Toba released thousands of times more material in a single event. Mount St. Helens, relatively speaking, was a volcano having a bad afternoon. Toba was a volcano ending an era. Ash from the eruption has been found over 7,000 kilometers away, buried in sediment layers across India, where it formed a layer up to 6 meters thick in some locations. That's ash from a single eruption, found nearly halfway around the world, still measurable 74,000 years later. Somewhere in India, a layer of dirt is still technically Indonesian. But the ash wasn't the part that nearly ended humanity. It was what the ash did to the sky. A supervolcanic eruption of that scale injects enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. Once there, it converts into sulfate aerosols, tiny reflective particles that spread globally and block incoming sunlight. This triggers what scientists call a volcanic winter. Global temperatures may have dropped by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius on average, with some models suggesting localized drops of 10 degrees or more in certain regions. That might not sound dramatic until you remember that a global temperature shift of even 1 or 2 degrees is enough to trigger an ice age. This was several times that, arriving suddenly, with no time to adapt. No weather forecast warning anyone to bring a jacket. Photosynthesis slows dramatically when sunlight is blocked at this scale. Plants that formed the base of every food chain on the planet began dying off across multiple continents. And when the base of a food chain collapses, everything depending on it collapses with it. This was not a good time to be a picky eater. This is where the human population crash actually happened. Not from the eruption itself. Most humans alive at the time were likely far enough from Sumatra to survive the initial event, which is the closest thing to good news in this entire story. The crisis came afterward, slowly, as the volcanic winter set in, and the food that sustained scattered human populations across Africa and into Asia began to disappear. Some researchers estimate the global human population may have dropped to as few as 1,000 to 10,000 breeding individuals. To put that in perspective, Modern conservation biology classifies populations below 10,000 individuals as critically endangered. By that standard, humanity itself was, for some period of time, on the same conservation list as pandas. Except nobody was around to put us on a poster. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Every single human being alive today, every continent, every ethnicity, every culture, every language, descends from the survivors of that population crash. Not most humans, all of them. The genetic bottleneck shows up in every human population that has ever been studied, everywhere on Earth, which means the recovery happened from one shared founding group, not several separate ones. This explains something else that's puzzled researchers for years: why humans, despite our enormous numbers today, are genetically more similar to each other than almost any other widespread species on the planet. You could take two humans from opposite sides of the Earth, with no shared ancestry for tens of thousands of years, and they would still be more genetically similar to each other than two chimpanzees living in neighboring valleys in the same forest. Those two chimpanzees have never even met, and somehow have less in common than you and a stranger on the other side of the planet. That similarity is not a coincidence. It's a scar. It's the genetic signature of nearly everyone dying at once. Some scientists have pushed back on the scale of the disaster. Newer evidence from certain archaeological sites suggests some human populations may have continued relatively undisturbed in parts of Africa and India even during the eruption, which would mean the bottleneck was real, but possibly less catastrophic and more regional than the most dramatic versions of this theory suggest. The debate is ongoing, as debates among scientists tend to be, forever, about everything. What isn't disputed is that the eruption happened, that it was almost incomprehensibly large, and that human genetic diversity does show signs of a major contraction around that period in history. They had no warning system, no understanding of volcanoes, no concept of what was happening to the sky or why the world had gone cold and dark. No one to blame, no news report, no group chat to ask if anyone else's sky looked weird today. They simply lived through it, generation after difficult generation, in small enough numbers that losing a handful of people could have ended everything. They didn't know they were the bottleneck. They didn't know the future of an entire species ran through them. They just kept going, because that was the only option available, and it turned out to be enough. You are the proof. Every person who has ever lived since is a descendant of people who didn't know how close it came, and also didn't have the luxury of complaining about it on the internet.